Hey everyone, how's it going? I hope everyone had a really good weekend. If this is your first time joining me for a video, I'm Kendra Perry. I'm a functional diagnostic nutritionist, and my three big loves are female hormones, chronic GI infections, and detoxification. So when I work with clients, that's primarily where I focus. My testing and my protocols are around those kind of main areas, because what I've found over the years of working with hundreds of clients is that most people have detox issues, most people have infections, and most people have hormone imbalance. So, figuring out with testing where the underlying dysfunctions are in those areas, that is how I help people get well and help them resolve their symptoms and help them enjoy their life more and have a better experience. So first of all, I apologize for this. This is just like my dirty windowsill. I was saying to my boyfriend this morning, like, my life is just a series of drinks. I've got my water, I've got my mate, I've got my broth, I've got my coconut water. I'm always just drinking all these drinks. So that's basically my dirty windowsill of drinks. Anyways, so today we're actually going to talk about a topic that I think is really cool, and I find that there is so many people who are interested in this gut healing tool. I actually wrote a blog on my, I wrote an article on my blog about this type of testing, and it is my most popular blog. I get tons of hits, I get tons of comments, and people are always reaching out to me based on that article because it's a really hot topic. I think anyone who's struggled with chronic GI issues, I find that people who do have chronic gut problems, they tend to be the most motivated. They tend to be the ones out there doing all the research, looking into stuff because it really sucks. It really interferes with your life. So as a result, they're super motivated and they tend to be educated. And eventually they do come to finding, learning about this test. And when they Google it, I'm the first one who comes up. So that tends to be how a lot of people find me. Okay, so let's talk about gut issues. Okay, so not everyone who has a gut issue will have typical gut symptoms, but if you are one of those people who's having typical gut issues, it's going to sound really familiar when I say things like gas, bloating, chronic burping, heartburn, acid reflux, constipation, diarrhea, abdominal pain, right? All those things are really, really common GI symptoms. And if they're chronic, meaning that they're happening all the time, they're happening on a daily basis, then there's something going on. There is something up in your gut. Excuse me, there's something up in your gut. And this is going to be a big problem because, like, when we think about it, it doesn't really matter if you eat this super healthy diet, you're eating your veggies, you're buying really high quality meat, you're eating those healthy fats. If you can't digest it, then basically you're just making really expensive poop, right? Because it's not super affordable or cheap to eat a really healthy diet, right? It does cost money, especially if you are buying organic. So you really want to make sure that you are breaking down and absorbing that food. And today I'm going to talk about the number one way you can identify what is causing your chronic GI issue. Because what I find is a lot of these really motivated like GI symptom people, the people who've got the chronic gut issues, they're doing a lot of the right things, right? They've done some research online. They know about bone broth and how bone broth is a really great way to help seal up and soothe the gut. They're probably taking a digestive enzyme or a digestive bitter, which helps improve digestion. They probably know about probiotics, which helps increase the bacterial content of your gut. They might even be experimenting with some antimicrobials to try and, flush a possible infection out of the gut. They might think, okay, I've got candida, I've probably got a parasite. There's a good chance that they have a pretty good idea with what is going on with them and, some of the tools that they need to fix it. But most of the people who come talk to me, they're still having such a massive issue with their gut, and these symptoms are not going away. They find themselves becoming more and more intolerant to more and more foods, which really sucks. They just can't eat the foods that they used to, and they're generally just feeling really, really frustrated, right? So when it comes to healing the gut, it is not a straightforward process, and everyone is so different. So my gut is unhealthy because of a totally different reason than your gut is unhealthy, right? And so we really need to address that sort of biochemical individuality, the things that make me and you very unique and very different. And if you're eating a gut balancing diet, so you're eliminating a lot of the processed foods, maybe you've eliminated gluten, dairy, even grains. If you're doing a lot of those gut rebuilding things that I just talked about, bone broth, enzymes or bitters, probiotics, that sort of thing, and you're still having these chronic GI issues, there's a pretty good chance there's actually an infection going on in your gut, okay? And there are so many different types of infections that can get into the GI tract. And it's a really common belief that, well, you can't get an infection or a parasite unless you're traveling abroad, unless you're traveling to a foreign country, but this is not the case. So there are parasites in Canada. There are parasites in the US. Giardia is a really common one. Maybe you've heard about that. I also know it as beaver fever. And this is a really, really common parasite, and you can get it from swimming in certain ponds or where there's beavers. That's why it's called beaver fever. Or you can get it from drinking contaminated drinking water. So you don't have to travel abroad to get infected with something like Giardia. So there are not only parasites that you can get infected with, but there's tons of these opportunistic bacteria that can infect your gut. There's also yeast, and I'm not just talking about Candida. Candida is kind of the famous fungus and yeast that you can get infected with, but there are multiple other strains of fungus or yeast that can also infect the gut. There's also viruses, which can play a big role in your gut health. So a strategic way to address the gut and stop that chronic GI experience that you're having and actually heal it so that those symptoms are not something you have to deal with anymore is actually using a test to go in the gut and take a really good look at, what is actually going on in there, which infections are present, and which ones do we need to address first, which are the important ones to address. Because, a lot of people are taking antimicrobials. They're like, okay, I've heard about golden seal, I've heard about knee, maybe I'm taking a bit of grapefruit seed extract. Well, depending on the type of infection you have, that actually might be having no effect on it. Okay. And additionally, you could be taking something and then stop taking it because you're like, well, I'm not sure if this is working, where it may even have been the right thing to take, but you just didn't take it for long enough. Okay. So there's a lot that can be going on in a gut. And the test that I use with clients is called the GI map. And so the GI map is from a lab called Diagnostic Solutions Lab. And this is what a lot of these chronic GI people who find me are Googling because they've heard about this type of test. So, oh my gosh, I'm dog sitting right now and he just wants to be with me so bad. He wants to go out for a walk, but he's just kind of whining because he's not getting the attention he wants. Anyways, so the reason why the GI map has become so popular and why so many people are Googling it is because it uses a different type of technology than a typical GI pathogen screen for stool. Okay, so traditionally what was used to look for parasites and pathogens and yeast and that sort of thing was what's called a microscopy test. So basically this involves putting poop, yes, your poop, into a petri dish, and a lab tech looks at it through a microscope, really high-powered microscope, to see what they can see, and they want to see over 24 hours what actually grows in that petri dish. And if, a parasite grows, or, an opportunistic bacteria or even yeast grows, then it's 100%. You have that infection because they were able to culture it or grow it in your stool. So it is very effective because there's no false positives, right? If they see that it grows in that petri dish, then yes, you have that infection and you need to do a protocol for it. But the problem is that not every type of organism that can be found in the GI tract or the large intestine can actually survive outside of the body. So as soon as you poop into that tube, it sort of self-destructs or it breaks down because it's used to thriving in an anaerobic environment or an environment without oxygen. So the oxygen just basically breaks it down and destroys it. So for that reason, there are certain types of organisms that will never be able to be grown or cultured in a stool. It just can't happen. So that is a really big downfall of that type of testing, is that it can miss a lot of things. On top of that, it relies on organisms showing up in the stool on a regular basis, right? So usually with a microscopy test, you're going to do 3 samples over 3 days, but not every organism will show up every 3 days. There are even certain organisms I've only heard of showing up seasonally, so just in the spring or just in the fall. So as a result, there's a really big error margin for error, right? There's a lot of things that can be missed with that type of test. Definitely with my own experience, I am someone who has had all the infections. And before I found a type of test that could actually address and find the things that were actually in me, I did several microscopy tests, and a lot of them were actually coming up as clean. And this is what actually made me kind of switch over, because I was running all these microscopy tests with people who were severely gut impaired. You know, they had chronic GI symptoms, and I just didn't believe it when their panels were coming up clean and showing me that there was nothing going on. It was boggling my mind. I didn't get it. I couldn't figure out, well, why? Like, these people have all the symptoms, they're correlating with infections, but I'm not finding anything. So I did some research and I came across the Diagnostic Solutions GI map, and this actually uses a different type of technology. So it takes the human component out of testing. So there is no lab tech involved. There's a machine that is looking for pathogenic DNA, so the DNA of these organisms. So it's very sensitive, very effective. You don't need to be able to grow things in stool. It doesn't matter if they're only going to show up in the stool, once a year. If they are in you and there's an active infection, then their DNA is pretty much going to show up in stool. And so the only downfall of like the GI map versus microscopy is that GI map, it has a report, and it's only looking for the things that are on the report. So if you have something, but it's not on their list or not on the report, and they're not looking for it, they're not going to find it. So, I mean, ideally, in a perfect world, if you were super loaded, you would run both tests. But most people, don't have the ability to spend, $1,000 on a gut panel. So then I usually just recommend the GI map, because it is really effective. It picks up more infections. So I really love this test because so many things can come up, and I'm actually going to show you one. So I'm just going to share my screen here. What I'm going to do is just this is actually one recent one that I got from a client, and it's what I call completely lit up, which basically just means a ton of stuff came up. So, right off the back, we can see that this person has salmonella. This person has Giardia. So this is the thing that I was mentioning in the beginning of this live stream is, this is a really serious parasite. It's super nasty. I've actually had it, but I've had a lot of things. And, it basically can infect the gallbladder. It leads to a lot of gallbladder attacks in some people, a lot of gallbladder pain, a lot of fat malabsorption. It's super aggressive parasite. So, this person has Giardia. And then as we go down here, we can see that they also have H. pylori, which is a really serious stomach infection. Okay. And this, infection, it lives in the stomach lining or the mucosa of the stomach, and your stomach is supposed to actually be acidic. And that's actually what allows you to break down protein, is that acidic environment. So H. pylori goes in there and it turns the environment to an alkaline environment, which better suits its health than yours. And so there's a lot of malabsorption. It means that you cannot break down protein. It's one of the leading causes of stomach cancer and gastric ulcers. So it's a pretty serious infection. And in this case, with this client, I would actually prioritize this. So this is where I'd start with, is the Helicobacter pylori, because this is probably the most serious infection. It's more serious than the Giardia. So that's actually where I'm going to start. Here are some of the beneficial flora. So these are flora that are commonly found in our gut. So I can take a look at these and just see, like what type of probiotic would be best for this person based off of their flora levels. Then we have the phyla microbiota, and this basically, the thing that matters here is the balance between Bacteroidetes and Firmicutes. So there's been a lot of research that shows that an elevated Firmicutes to Bacteroidetes ratio is implicated in obesity. So if this client were obese and they had an elevated ratio, which they don't, but if they did, then I would be able to say, well, it's possible that the reason that you can't lose weight and why you're struggling with your weight is partially due to this ratio. At least that's what some of the research has shown. These are actually new markers. These were just added to the test. Okay, so we have these additional dysbiotic bacteria, and this is where I kind of say that things are just lit up, right? Because these are all known toxin producers. These will destroy your gut. All these bacteria, they poop, and bug poop is toxic, so it clogs up your liver. This host of infections here, these are potential autoimmune triggers. So for example, Citrobacter is really associated with rheumatoid arthritis. Klebsiella, again, is associated with some joint autoimmune conditions. So they can be triggers for autoimmunity. So it's not diagnosing autoimmunity. It's just pointing the finger that like, hey, like, like if you have a genetic predisposition for autoimmunity and you have these infections, this could be an issue for you. So this is something that we are going to want to address with a healing protocol. But no yeast on this test. So here's the 5 strains of yeast that this test tests for. So we have Candida albicans. Again, this is the famous one. Most people have heard of this. And then the many other strains of Candida, Geotrichum. Mycosporidium is actually what's considered a parasitic fungus. This is probably the worst thing that would come up in the yeast section. I have seen a few of these lately. The test also looks at viruses. We're looking at cytomegalovirus and Epstein-Barr virus. So these can actually lay dormant in your system and kind of evade the immune system and cause all kinds of issues. So I don't see too many positives of these, but again, these are new markers. They just added these, so they're pretty cool. I get excited about this. And then if we go down, we can see this person actually has 3 more parasites. So not only do they have the Giardia, but they also have the Blastocystis hominis, this Diatomeba fragilis, and a Dolomex nana. So you can see that these aren't being flagged as high, but from a functional standpoint, you don't want to see them, right? It's not desirable to have protozoa parasites in your body. So some parasites too. Blastocystis hominis actually tends to come with H. pylori. I don't usually see them on the same test. Usually you see the other one come up on the retest, but in this case, they actually came together. So that's kind of cool. And then this is kind of gross, but I think it's awesome. This is new. They just added these in the past couple months, these worms. So we've got different types of worms here. This one right here is a tapeworm. So very cool. I actually recently just found this one in a client. So, very interesting things to, you want to know that this is going on in you. Because this one client of mine who had this species right here, this tapeworm, she was not able to gain weight. She was super skinny. She was losing weight like crazy and she couldn't figure out why. Well, maybe it's because she has a tapeworm, right? So things that we definitely want to know. Getting rid of these things is greatly going to improve your health. Okay, so now we have some of the intestinal health markers. This is a pancreatic enzyme marker, so we can see like how is your enzyme production. This is a little lower than I like to see. Steatocrit is a fancy name for fecal fat. And then we have beta-glucuronidase, which is a marker for detoxification. Fecal occult blood refers to microscopic blood. I don't see many of these positive. When it is positive, I always refer out to a gastroenterologist just because it can, in some cases, indicate something more serious. So a big reason why this client has a lit up panel is actually due to the fact that their immune response is super low. So secretory IgA is the body's primary immunoglobulin. You're basically the body's first line of defense. And you can see it is super depressed. And considering that there's so many infections, what we'd actually want to see is that it was super high, that it was higher than the 2000, right? Because that would show us that, you were having a heightened immune response. The body was responding to all these infections. But at this point, the immune system is super low, it's super suppressed. And it's a no wonder why so many infections came up on this test, because the immune system is no longer able to respond. So whatever is going on with this person has been going on for a long time, and the immune system has lost its ability to respond, okay? Antigliadin IgA, this is just a marker for gluten intolerance. It's not the only marker for gluten intolerance. There are a lot more, so this doesn't diagnose that, but it can give you an indication whether gluten is an issue for you or not. And then calprotectin is a marker for GI inflammation, okay? And these, I don't really use this much. These are just antibiotics that are commonly used for H. pylori. And if a person did decide to go to the antibiotic route, then this person would likely be fine with these because they don't actually have the gene that makes them resistant to this type of treatment. Okay. So you're probably wondering, what do I do to heal this sort of thing, right? Because you see that there's so many different infections going on in here, but how do you actually heal it and treat it? Well, the good news is the majority of those infections, at least every single one on that panel, will respond to herbal treatment. So I will sometimes send someone to a doctor for a prescription for antibiotics. There are certain infections, where herbal treatment doesn't always work. But in this case, like pretty much everything here should respond to herbal treatment, which I love because it's gentle on the system, and then you don't have to deal with all the consequence of taking an antibiotics, which is a big time is the reason why people are getting so many infections to begin with. So this is a really powerful test. It gives you a ton of information. And if you're someone who's been struggling with GI issues forever, I mean, you want to know what's up. Like, there's nothing worse than like having to run into another room because your gas is so bad, or just, you know, having chronic diarrhea, or just not being able to poop because you're constipated. It really interferes with your life, and it may actually influence some of the decisions that you make, right? If you have chronic diarrhea, you're probably less likely to go on a camping trip. You know, if you have chronic gas, maybe you're not going to go into that social event because you're going to stink up the place. So, you know, I think it's really important to deal with the gut, because if there are infections in you and they persist and you don't address them, they're just going to cause more and more inflammation. They're going to cause more malabsorption and just prevent you from really digesting all those really important minerals and vitamins from the good, healthy food that you're eating. So I just wanted to go over this week on the page. I'm going to be talking a lot about this test just because I'm seeing so much interest in it. And on, I believe on Thursday, I'm going to be going over a couple case studies so I can show you some of the clients I worked with who had really lit up GI maps, and what we actually did to get rid of those infections and what their retest looked after they went through the treatment protocol. So I wanted to show that to you, to show you that, you know, it is 100% possible to heal. I do it all the time. I work with hundreds of clients to do that. So on Thursday, I believe 5 p.m. Pacific, I'm going to be going through a couple case studies. And as always, the retest or replay is always posted immediately after the live recording. So if you do want to learn more, if you just want to talk to me and see if my gut healing program is a good fit for you, I do offer a free discovery call. You can do that at the top of the page. I think I linked to it in this video, but I will link to it. And you can also go to my website, kendraperry.net, and we can just have a free chat, see if you're a fit, see if this program would be good for you, because I get it. I've been there. I'm someone who has dealt with GI issues my entire life. And I also had a GI map that was lit up. I had actually one of the most dangerous parasites that you can get on the planet. So I had that and I got rid of it, and I feel a lot better now. So if you want to learn more, book that free consult with me. And if you have any questions, I do come back and keep checking these questions. I love interacting with you. I love chatting with you. So if you want your questions answered, just ask me and I will get back to you. Okay. Have a great day. Have a great week. Bye.